we're on Memories of a Loving Soul, Swami Premananda. My book says Swami Premananda, Teachings and Reminiscences, but they're the same book. In my book, we're on page 12. We have just talked about Swami Premananda going out to beg one day because he slipped in, and following the rules that Swami Vivekananda had set up for the Belur Math. And Swami Premananda left the monastery to beg for alms that day because he had slipped in. In 1887, Swamis Sardananda, Abhedananda, and Premananda decided to travel on pilgrimage to Puri. While there, they lived in a monastery belonging to another order. Their only food was prasad from the Jagannath temple. During their stay at the monastery, Premananda suffered an attack of typhoid fever. The careful nursing of his brothers, however, soon assisted his recovery. After a period of 6 months, they returned. In 1895, Premananda went on another pilgrimage to North India and stayed for many months at Vrindavan, the scene of Sri Krishna's divine relationship with the Gopi maidens. While there, he remained absorbed in God most of the time and visited the temples each afternoon and evening. Now, the temples are numerous in Vrindavan. Numerous. So you make a whole round of them to go. The ecstatic atmosphere of this holy city plunged the Swami into a state of devotional fervor, and he bowed before all women he met as manifestations of the gopis. Then in 1897, news came that Swami Vivekananda had returned from his first tour in the United States, America. Although it pained him to leave Vrindavan, his desire to see Swamiji prevailed, and he returned to Calcutta. During the return journey, Premananda visited the Holy Mother, who at that time was staying at Jairambati. He remained with her for 2 weeks. One day, during a walk, he passed by a small pond where he noticed a number of beautiful lotus plants. He was suddenly seized with a desire to worship the feet of Mother with those flowers. He plunged at once into the pond and picked a number of them. But after he left the water, he discovered that numerous leeches had fastened themselves to his body, and he was covered with blood. When he presented himself before Holy Mother, she expressed much concern about his condition and told him never to do such a thing again. In 1902, Swami Vivekananda died unexpectedly at the Belur Monastery. The sudden loss of this great leader stunned the order, but the recovery was quick. Swami Brahmananda immediately assumed the task of guiding the activities of the mission, and the heavy responsibility of administering Belur Monastery fell to Swami Premananda. This is a distinction they have in India. Everything is the Ramakrishna order of monks, but they distinguish between the Math and the mission. The Math is the monastic center half of the Ramakrishna order, and the mission is the active center that goes out and starts hospitals, runs schools, relief work. They're the very active and visual monks of the Ramakrishna order in India. So Brahmananda immediately assumed the task of guiding the mission, and Premananda the Math, or the monastery. Perhaps no choice was better made. The Swami's affectionate and loving nature, as well as his compassion and strength, were exactly what such a job demanded, and the demands were many. Not only did he perform the daily worship in the shrine, but he trained the young brahmacharis, received devotees and guests, and instructed one and all in various spiritual matters. It was an imposing responsibility, but Premananda assumed his gigantic task with characteristic cheerfulness and energy. Gradually, the loving nature of the Swami and his protective attitude toward the young monks at the monastery earned him the title of Mother of the Mat. Love, of course, can never be wholly or adequately described. It must be felt, and perhaps that is why we can only struggle, often ineffectually, to appreciate the full extent of Swami Premananda's love through its effect on others. Swami Ganeshwarananda, who served as a young monk under the Swami, recalls these incidences in his own experience. Now, Swami Ganeshwarananda was in Chicago for quite a little while. His reminiscence. Because Swami Premananda was so loving to all, he was often referred to as Mother of the Mat. He could also be quite stern at times, and it was always for our good. I was once severely reprimanded by him. There had been talk about the Bhagavad Gita, and I said, "Yes, I have read it." Immediately, Swami Premananda said, "My boy, say I am reading it. Never say I have read the Gita. One can never finish reading the Gita." Another time, we were weeding the Mat garden. Swami Premananda was watching us, and he noticed that one of the boys was not pulling the weeds out by the roots. He called out to him, "My boy, you must pull the weeds out by the roots. Otherwise, you are simply fooling yourself and wasting time. If you do not realize the necessity of rooting out weeds in a garden, how can you weed out your own old faults and tendencies? How can you understand the real meaning of spiritual life?" And he added significantly, "Weed out, boys, weed out, root and all." On another occasion, Swami Premananda chastised us for talking too much. "You talkative fools, you talk nothing but nonsense. Let not your tongue talk, let your character speak." And again, "Why do you buzz so much? You bees evidently haven't yet found the honey." We were looking at some pictures of the early days here, and Swami Ganeshwarananda, while he was in Chicago, he used to send postcards to people he had met, especially down in the Hollywood Center. And he said, well, he signed all of his postcards Joe Bliss, because he said, Ganeshwar is a very common name in India, just like Joe, and Ananda means bliss, so Joe Bliss. Swami Premananda taught the ideal of perfection in everything, even the smallest, most insignificant tasks, from repairing shoes to chanting the scriptures, according to the Bengali proverb. This was one of Swamiji's main teachings, and Premananda obeyed it to the letter. These boys must learn everything, he once said, to cut vegetables, perform the worship, bookkeeping, lecturing, everything. And in all these things, they must be perfect. I am trying to train them thus. If I am harsh, it is only for their own good, but I am never really angry, for I love them deeply. In this way, he taught the young monks to be men of God. He would often scold the boys if they did not read the scriptures regularly. Once he approached a young brahmachari who had been spending too much of his time working in the garden. "You don't study, do you?" Premananda asked him. "Are you here only to do the work of a coolie?" "No, sir," was the sheepish reply. "All right, my boy. I'm giving you 3 months to read the scriptures from beginning to end. Otherwise, you just get enough fare for your boat across the Ganges. Although it is hardly imaginable that the Swami would consider executing such a threat, it had the desired effect, and the young monk was soon at his lessons. Sometimes after this, another amusing incident occurred. That was amusing. One afternoon, several of the young brahmacharis and swamis were gathered with Maharaj, that's Swami Premananda, in his room upstairs, engaged in spiritual talk. It began to grow late, and when Swami Premananda found that none of the boys had come down, he shouted, "Hello up there, you boys come down now. The next meal still has to be cooked." Swami Premananda decided to tease his brother disciple. He told the boys present, "As you approach Swami Premananda, say to him, 'Holy Sir, give us liberation. Then we will have no more difficulty with our meditation, prayer, and other disciplines. Surely you can do this for us.'" Premananda overheard the joke Maharaj was preparing and shouted upstairs, "All right, all of you can have your samadhi. To that I have no objection. I will handle everything. But just once let me find the noise of the marketplace arising in your minds, and I'll pull you by the ears and soon put you back to work." In a very real sense, however, Premananda taught the young monks that work is a form of worship. At every step, he would remind them the monastery is the home of Sri Ramakrishna, and that he walks in every room. Therefore, he urged them to keep the buildings and grounds spotless, and regarded them always as the abode of the Lord. Although Premananda was essentially good-natured, he was neither emotional nor sentimental. But on occasion he would become God-intoxicated, and his blissful mood would unfailingly draw others into the same state. At one such time, there happened to be some devotional singing at the monastery, and Premananda suddenly became filled with divine joy. He urged Swami Sardananda to sing. "Brother, you must. Don't you see how much joy is flowing here? But unless you sing, it will stop." Sardananda protested that he had not sung for a long time, but Premananda would not listen to him. So to please his brother monk, Sardananda sang and joined in the dancing. The next day he remarked, "Alas, Babaran made me dance in my old age, but who can resist his entreaties?" Swami Premananda's whole life was one of complete self-surrender. He could do nothing without knowing the will of the Lord. Always at the back of every action was the subtle but commanding presence of Sri Ramakrishna, and sometimes this presence would become visible, and Premananda would be blessed with the vision of his beloved Guru. However, this did not always occur under the most pleasant circumstances. Once Premananda and Brahmananda strongly disagreed on a particular issue. Grabbing his few possessions, Premananda marched out of the Belur compound, prepared to leave for good. But the moment he reached the gate, the towel he was carrying over his shoulder was suddenly snatched from him, and in an instant tightened around his neck. He turned, only to find the figure of Sri Ramakrishna standing in front of him. "Where are you going, my child?" the master said. "How can you go away, leaving me here?" Overwhelmed by the experience, Premananda rushed to Maharaj's room and prostrated himself at his feet. During the year 1906, Premananda made another pilgrimage to the holy city of Puri. One day he happened to notice a Christian missionary standing before the Jagannath temple, strongly upbraiding Hinduism. The Swami's ire became aroused. He began to chant loudly, "Hari Bol, Hari Bol," chant the name of the Lord, and he soon had the crowd of more than 100 persons chanting along with him. The missionary could not make himself heard above the insistent rhythm of the chant and was forced to leave. The temple priests immediately approached the Swami and expressed their gratitude, telling him that they had been powerless to stop the missionary. But Premananda quickly left the temple grounds, abashed, and sad at heart over his impulsive actions. That night he had a dream of Sri Ramakrishna. The master said to him, "Why did you break up that gathering? He too was spreading my name and teaching. Tomorrow you must find the missionary and beg to be forgiven." Early the next day, Premananda set out in search of him. After considerable difficulty, he found the man and humbly entreated his forgiveness. Swami Premananda's compassion for the suffering and distress of others was revealed on numerous occasions. This incident is typical. A young man from a noble family of Calcutta had fallen in with undesirable companions and through their influence had taken to drugs. This greatly pained his relatives, who had tried their best to correct his behavior, but all their efforts failed. In desperation, the young man's brother, who was a monk at Belur Monastery, sought the help of Swami Premananda. The Swami quietly listened to the story and then went to visit the boy. After a long talk, he convinced him to come to the monastery for a visit the following day, which he did. He continued to come to Belur many times later. Gradually, the spiritual presence of Premananda began to work a change in his character. How much tenderness and affection he bestowed on me, he recalled later. My relatives and friends abandoned me, but his love sustained me. He knew all my misdeeds, and still he loved me. Eventually, he renounced the world and joined the order as a monk. The remarkable solicitude which Swami Premananda showed to visiting devotees was another demonstration of his considerate and loving nature. His affection for these devotees was more than a simple expression of welcome. It was a profound act of devotion. Through the grace of Sri Ramakrishna, Premananda had reached that state where he actually saw service to men as worship of God. For instance, visitors to the monastery would frequently appear at odd, even unreasonable hours. This would often happen when the monks were having a short rest during the early afternoon. Rather than disturb them, the Swami would quietly go to the kitchen himself and prepare food for the devotees. Once asked about this habit of his, he said, "Householders have much to do. Is it always possible for them to arrive at the proper time? And what can we do but serve them? This costs only a little physical effort. Through the Master's grace, nothing is wanting here. Should we not be blessed by doing these things for his children?" The saintly character of Swami Premananda did not go unnoticed, even among some of the most worldly persons. Once an editor of a magazine published in Calcutta, who was noted for being a witty and amusing writer, attended a celebration at the Belur Monastery. Swami Premananda happened to walk in front of him, and as he did so, the gentleman jestingly asked what entertainment the monastery offered. "What entertainment can we possibly hope to offer you, whose lively pen brings joy and happiness Premananda said with a smile. It may be true that I have such qualities in my pen, the author quickly rejoined, but in all your actions I see expressed a sweetness, for indeed you are the embodiment of sweetness. His love for others transcended any racial or religious barrier. On one occasion, a Muslim gentleman arrived at the monastery with several Hindu friends. After visiting the shrine, they were given some food. They finished eating, but everyone in the room hesitated to take away the Muslim's plate. To the embarrassment of all, Swami Premananda came forward and without the least hesitation removed it. A similar incident occurred many years later when the Swami was visiting a Muslim village in East Bengal. He was approached by a Muslim who was impressed with the Swami's talk on the existence of God in all things. Thereupon, the Muslim asked him if he would eat food touched by him. "Yes, I can," the Swami replied unhesitatingly. Immediately some food was brought, and he took it from the hands of the Muslim and ate it. Although this action may seem innocent enough to a Westerner, a Hindu reared among strict laws regarding the preparation and eating of food would consider such an act shockingly unorthodox, and particularly at that time in history. Everyone was very concerned about how food was prepared, who prepared it, and who had touched it, and whether it had been offered. So that it was not casual. We have mentioned earlier that although Swami Premananda possessed an affectionate nature, he could also be quite stern. Many of the senior monks in the Ramakrishna order still vividly recall his reprimands and pointed rebukes. But his anger had no sting to it, and if he discovered one of the young men sulking or acting depressed, he would immediately speak to him affectionately and offer him the best things to eat from his own plate. Sometimes he would even follow after a monk with a glass of milk if he felt he had been too harsh with him. Once when the Swami was ill, a devotee got into the habit of occasionally bringing delicacies for his attendants to eat. Noticing this, Premananda called one of them to him and said, "The master often told us that a monk should only take a small meal at night and restrain his greed, but out of greed you are doing just the opposite." The attendant's feelings were hurt. Without anybody's knowledge, he left the residence later in that day. At the next meal, Premananda noticed that his absence and began to grow anxious. He sent his other attendants to find him, but the young monk had disappeared without a trace. The Swami became heartsick at the young man's absence. During the evening, the attendant slipped quietly in a side door, and when the Swami learned of his return, he called him to his room. "My child, I have grown old and weak from illness, and cannot always keep my temper. Do not be angry with me if I say things in such a condition." As he spoke, tears came to his eyes. He asked that some sweets be brought, and fed the young man with his own hand. "Others will follow you if you love them and make them your own," the Swami once wrote to a devotee. A leader, in order to be a true leader, must necessarily be free from egoism. In obedience to Swami Vivekananda, Premananda sought to make the Belur Monastery a center for the spiritual renaissance of India, and this he did, all in the spirit of loving kindness. He drew others to him through that love, and at the back of it was an unswerving faith in the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna and a dedicated, untiring zeal to serve the wishes of his guru. He was firmly convinced that the message of Sri Ramakrishna must somehow reach the minds and hearts of all those who will listen, wherever they may be. In another letter, he wrote, "To make mankind your own by loving them, that is the real jnana, the real bhakti of this age. Work and serve with all your heart." The ideas of Sri Ramakrishna are being well propagated. Let them spread over the whole world. Let the flood of bliss and peace come to all places throughout the world. Although Premananda was unfailingly anxious and concerned for the health and comfort of others, he had little regard for his own. He would often remove the best food from his own plate and give it to some of the junior monks. He kept few clothes. One time a devotee gave his attendant 4 shirts for the Swami's use. When he learned about the gift, he scolded the attendant. It does not become a monk to have so much clothing. After he passed away, his only possessions were an empty canvas bag, a few books, among them a copy of the Gita, and an extra piece of clothing. And I think we'll stop there for this evening. We're still on the introduction. Ooh, we've only got 3 pages left, okay? And we'll do the some announcements. This Saturday, Swami Premananda from Toronto will be giving a talk on simplicity for simplicity. Now, those of you that are here in town, after Vespers, the talk will be at 5 o'clock, Zoom and YouTube. Vespers, and then we'll have a potluck down in the convent. So everyone is welcome to come. July 2nd, Sunday morning, Swami Prabhavananda will give a lecture, From Willpower to Love. And then we will have the gospel reading on the 8th. We're not having it on the 3rd? Oh, no, we'll have it on the 8th as usual. And we'll have the 3rd of July, we'll have the Memories of Loving Soul. My dates are not too good. The 4th is on a Thursday?
Tuesday.
Huh?
Tuesday.
Tuesday, okay, so we'll be on Wednesday, we'll have the regular reading. I'm really confused on July. I haven't seen the calendar yet. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, okay, Tuesday. You're all invited to Trabuco on Tuesday if you want to go. And you'll have to look online for their program. But I believe Swami Premananda is going to be there also. Okay? Any questions on what we read today? You got a firm and very comprehensive exposition on what the monasteries and convents are about, what they were originally, how they were originally started, and what the ideals behind them are. Okay. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. And we'll see you hopefully Saturday on Zoom, perhaps, and Sunday with our Prabhavananda. And if you can get to the 4th, please come. Wednesday on Loving Soul. Okay?